webinar is educating the public about issues that affect the newcomer community that JIAS Toronto serves. We right now have a number of people still signing into this webinar. So before we start, we're going to give them a couple more minutes to sign on. Today's topic is about how COVID-19 is affecting the refugee community. And we're excited to have the panelists we have, and I'll introduce them in a couple of minutes. In the meantime, for all of you who have signed in, please note that you have been put on mute. This allows us to make sure that everyone can hear the panelists speaking and that we're not getting background noise taking place. So thank you very much. I see some familiar faces signing on, so it's very nice to see friends of JIAS and new people that we don't know, but we think they're probably from Holy Blossom and other communities. So we're going to give it a couple more minutes and then we'll start the program. Somebody asked whether or not we can see everybody who has signed in. Other than the panelists, we don't see video of any of the participants on the call. I'm giving it another minute and then we'll start. Great. My name is Elise Herzig, and I have the honor and privilege of being the Executive Director of JIAS Toronto. JIAS Toronto is a settlement agency that has been in business for 98 years. We're very proud of the work that we do and the people that we support. On today's panel, we have three wonderful speakers. Today's topic is the impact of COVID-19 on the refugee community in Canada. We have Maureen Silikoff, who is a well-known refugee lawyer who's been practicing for over 30 years in this field. She shared with me that she started as a law student doing some legal aid work, and someone approached her and said, would she like to help save somebody's life by not having them be deported to go back to their home country? And she became addicted and has never once questioned her decision to be working in this legal space. And she has an incredible reputation, not only for the refugees that she serves, but as being a passionate advocate for people in the settlement field and in the refugee immigration community. We also have on the panel today, Jackie Freeland. Jackie, one of her many hats that she wears is being one of JIAS best in class, I can't describe any other way, volunteer excellence, working with the refugee community. Every time we go to Jackie, she always says, yes, I'll help you with whatever the question it is with our refugee community. She is part of the Synagogue Holy Blossom Temple, who is a partner in today's webinar. That synagogue has, I don't want to get this wrong, because I was amazed with the number, but they have supported in the last 5 years, 8 different refugee families. And what is amazing is how they were able to get their whole synagogue behind this community. And really, they are a model of excellence that really other groups can only aspire to, because as a constituent group, they've been really a great role model, and they have taught us a lot about what volunteerism looks like in the refugee community. And our third speaker today is Victoria Corin. I have the real privilege of getting to work with Victoria on a daily basis. Victoria is a member of the JIAS settlement team. Victoria works with a number of our newcomer groups, whether it's senior citizens, newcomers that literally just arrive and are visitors, to figure out how they can become a permanent resident. But she also has been working very closely with the Yazidi community. And while she has asked me to make sure that everyone knows that she is not an expert on refugee immigration, her personal experience and the deeply trusted relationship she has built with her clients really allows us to learn a lot about this community. And she has become a voice for this community that really not only helps our clients, but has helped develop our agency strategy in terms of developing meaningful programs for that client community. So with that, I'd like to get right into the questions. For the viewers of today's webinar, the format I'm going to be using is asking a few questions we discussed in advance with the panelists, but then I'm going to open it up for a conversation amongst the panelists and let it organically go where it does. If you have any questions that you would like to ask, please put them on the chat line. I'm not going to be looking at the chat line all the time, so I may not get to it right away, but I do have, if you send it to Naomi or to Jody, they will make sure that I actually see it in case I miss it. So thank you very much. So I'd like to start off with Maureen. I talked a bit about how you got into the space, and in our conversation on Friday, you were sharing with me the challenges that refugees are going through right now with COVID in terms of people that are in Canada right now. What does that mean? And also refugees that want to come into Canada. And I was hoping you could perhaps paint a picture of the landscape for the viewers who are watching today's webinar.
Thanks, Elise. Thank you so much for having me. And also thank you for the idea of this webinar. I think it's really important during this pandemic to keep refugees in mind. Refugees are vulnerable people, and you know, just as we're seeing, you know, human elements of all types and dealing with all kinds of vulnerabilities, refugees fit into that category. So I think it's really important now to consider refugees and not lose sight of that group of people. So what we're seeing, you know, our border, of course, you know, of utmost importance is health safety. And so our government has put in place restrictions on people arriving here, both by way of airplanes from various countries and also with our land border with the United States. And so basically, the government has cut off all non-essential travel. So that, of course, impacts refugees. People can't easily get on the planes to arrive in Canada. And also, when they come to the US border, there are some exceptions, but many people are turned back into the US. So, you know, what does this mean for us? Of course, we have to protect public health. And I think we have to think about what are the least harsh measures, you know, that can be put in place, because there has to be a balance. And we know that the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee has put out guidelines right now on how to deal with refugee movement. And they've cautioned that there shouldn't be blanket border closures because there's quarantine methods that countries could put in place. So, you know, we have to balance things out, and whenever possible, it's important, as opposed to having, you know, an absolute closure of the border, to keep in mind what quarantine measures might work and allow refugees to still enter Canada, and for the rest of the Canadian population to remain safe. And I think we can balance those out.
That's great. And, you know, just a reminder for the people who are calling in, I think one of the challenges is that refugees by nature tend to live in highly dense populated areas where they're contained in small areas of space without access really to medical conditions. And so if there's an outbreak of COVID-19 in those areas, they don't necessarily have access to medical equipment, and they're actually at a higher risk. And as you're suggesting, if there was a way that the government could do in a safe way, making sure that we can quarantine them, trying to get refugees that have been approved to come to Canada now would be a wonderful action on the part of the government. And we're going to get a little later on in the conversation. I'd like to talk about what's changed right now in the refugee process in their applications, but I'd like to move on right now to Jackie. can you perhaps share a little bit about your history in working with refugees and what you're seeing now going on with the communities that you support? We had a lot of discussion about your driveway visits, etc.
Okay, so I'll start with how we began, because I think that strong foundation really set us up for success since mid-March when everything changed. And we started in the fall of 2015. A large group gathered at Holy Blossom to find out what could we do to begin to search how can we help with the Syrian refugee situation. And we very quickly decided we needed to partner with JIAS, and it's been a great partnership from the outset. And where Holy Blossom was able to provide a tremendous base of volunteers. We have over 150 people from our synagogue, from the community, and financial donations and in-kind donations and expertise, be it in job searching or resume writing and connections to help get apartments. Where we had all these wonderful volunteers, JIAS helped bring structure. And one of the very first things they did was recommend how we set from the health and wellness and the housing and the welcome packages and all the different things. And every time a new family has arrived over the last 5 years, and we had 3 families arrive in 2019, we turned back to that structure that JIAS gave us. And in the beginning, before the families even arrived, the focus was very much physical needs. So it was the house that was close to transit and shopping and good schools and possibly local relatives. It was stocking the house. It was getting the clothing they would need to survive the Canadian winter, and the skates and the bikes and the helmets and everything else to make their life full. But very soon after the physical, we turned to the personal. And that was within days or moments of their arrival at Pearson, and in the weeks since, taking them on the first shop, having volunteers meet with them regularly to practice their English, to volunteer to go buy their phone and set up their internet plan, all of that. And because we had these incredibly close personal relationships that were one to one, we were able to switch in March to Zoom and email and text, and almost every week I and others sit down and they contact people, and some are well past their month 13, which is that first month after the year when they don't get financial support from us. So they always get our personal support, and we're there for them. But we're certainly more in contact, as you and I discussed, more frequently now than I would be with families that are already 3 or 4 years out. Our biggest group of families came in the summer and fall of 2016. It was over 20 people spanning 4 different generations, many different family units, some with kids, some the matriarch family. And some of them are now preparing for their citizenship exam, taking this time to study. And one of these families has 3 little boys. So one of the first things we did in kind of late March was make sure they had tons of puzzles and Lego and books and things to read to occupy the kids so they weren't on their screens all the time. And in some ways their lives are very different, and in some ways their lives are just like us. I'll laugh with some of the women who are spending their days trying to organize groceries and cook and clean the bathroom and do the laundry and fight with children to get them off the screen time. And in other ways, their lives are completely different with traumatic memories that can come back. We have done some they stand on the front steps and we stand in the street, and we have visits. We've had a few of those. We've done guitar Zoom lessons with 2 girls from 2 different families. They're now using guitar tricks. It's a far better teacher than me teaching them guitar on Zoom. And yesterday, this was a lot of fun. There's a Yazidi family, and there's a mother and a 16-year-old daughter, and we did the Miles Nadell JCC Zumba class together on Zoom. So there are definitely ways. You have to get creative, and it helps having the foundational relationships that we've created.
I love your comments, Jackie, because one of the things that I really appreciated that you expressed on Monday and also today is that while the financial support ends after month 12, the connection that you make with these families is ongoing. And the fact that you had a family that you helped a few years ago that now lives in London, Ontario, and you had not spoken to them in 8 months, the fact that she reached out to you to see how your family was doing as well, it's a 2-way connection where the commonalities and the friendship are supposed to last past the 12-month expiry date. And so, the stories that you share really do reflect that. Victoria, you work a lot with Yazidi families, and I was hoping perhaps you could paint a picture of some of your clients and some of the things that you've experienced, both the wonderful things that you're seeing and some of the real challenges that you faced with your clients.
Yes, thank you, Liz. Yeah, absolutely. In my course of work at JIAS, also worked with Syrian refugees, and this is actually how my work with the refugees started at the JIAS. But comparing with the population that I'm working right now with the Yazidi families, it's 13 families that currently I involved with. I'm myself, I gained so much professionally from this work, and that's what I'm really grateful for. This population that went through horrible atrocities, that continue being re-traumatized, because on one hand, the current opportunities of technology definitely provides us with the chances to be connected to our families and their families back home, but at the same time, they continue getting various news. Sometimes it's a wonderful news that someone was released from captivity, but sometimes that the grave were discovered, that they learned that the person was killed. So this population, they're kind of constantly in a situation of crisis, constantly in the situation of trauma. So while working with them, with these 13 families, what I learned that this group is extremely resilient, and it's fascinating how resilient they are, how hardworking these people are. After being through this traumatic experience right now in the situation of COVID, they still manage. I connect with these families on a weekly basis, and I hear from them. They tell me, Victoria, we're fine. Most of them are managing fine. Definitely, there are families who struggle a lot, and from these 13 families, 10 of the families, it's a single parent families where mother with children. I have mother with 6 children. I have a widow with 3 children. For all of them, their husbands were killed, and most of them witnessed enslaved, some of them for years, some of them for 2 years. And right now in this situation, they do struggle, but they still survive. And I call them not, victims of what they went through, but they're survivors, and they definitely are. So in this situation, our first work from JIAS was it's making sure that they are aware of the situation. Because, again, 10, 11 mothers that I work with, they're illiterate in their own language. And this, common practice when we can have some information sheets translated and distributed among our clients wouldn't work with them. So we had to work very closely with Kurmanji interpreter, who would call every single family almost on a daily basis, because the information, especially during the first 2 weeks, as we know, was changing so rapidly. So almost every 2-3 days, we had to call every single family and update them of what's happening. So that was our priority during the first weeks. Then the next struggle was it's really connect children to school, online school learning. So never mind that most of the family didn't have enough equipment, like let's say one mother with 6 children, with 9 children. So for example, Minister of Education sent out emails to fill out about the equipment, but these people even don't have emails, never mind that they don't know what in this email. So our part was actually, and it's only not me, but the entire team had to get in touch with every single family and figure out how much equipment they're missing and fill out these forms for each and a child. So, and you know, after they got this equipment, now what do I do with that? How do I actually get online? How do I access my Google Class account? So this is where I had to connect with school principals, and because most of these children reside in one community very close in Richmond Hill, so at least it's not 10 schools, but I was in touch with 3 principals that they really, you know, pointed out which kids are still not in touch with their teachers, which kids are not have an opportunity to go online. So that's another struggle. And of course, it's the whole issue of parenting. Many of these women who became widows and who were sexually enslaved, their kids either were born in captivity or they got there when the kids were very, very young. So I see that during that extremely traumatic time, they either never got a chance to develop healthy parenting skills, or the skills were lost in those circumstances. So when they came to Canada, and actually, you know, we worked a lot along with our psychotherapists, worked along in restoring the skills or developing the skills. So school became a big part of that, taking a big part of that, giving you know, structure to these families. So now it's lost. So many families we hear tell me, I don't know what to do with my kid. And we may hear it from a lot of families, but specifically for these families, school gave a big part of their structure in the daily living. And right now it's lost. So there is a lot of components that are lost during COVID-19, but definitely there is a lot of bright sides that I can also talk a little bit later about.
That's great, thank you. So just to give some background for some of the people on the call who may not be as aware of of some of JIAS's work, I have to give a big shout out to IRCC, who funds our translators and a lot of our work. If we did not have the translators, we would not be able to do the work that that Victoria is talking about, and that was literally on a daily basis, having translators call each of these families to make sure that they understood as things changed in the ecosystem and in the communities that they lived in, what was acceptable, what wasn't acceptable. You know, now you can't take your kids to a park, now you can't have play dates. And so, as Victoria said, even though the governments were trying, whether it was on a municipal or a provincial or federal level, to get information out, and JIAS as well was sending emails out on a daily basis to our clients, the fact of the matter is this community, many of the people are illiterate in their own mother tongue. And so they don't have emails, they can't read. And so without those phone calls and without those translators, we couldn't do our work. And later I'll have Victoria share a beautiful story about one of our pregnant Yazidi women. One of the questions that came on is related to a conversation I had with Maureen. One of the questions that I asked Maureen was, you know, when we think about essential, you know, what is the definition of essential? Do refugees fall under that category? So Maureen, perhaps you can share some of your insights, and at the same time when you answer that question, I'd appreciate if you can also share with the group what right now, if a refugee case also comes to the court, what does that look like differently for a refugee?
For sure. So just as a starting point, there's 2 ways that refugees could get status in Canada. And the first is refugee sponsorship. So that's JIAS's work in terms of, you know, sponsoring refugees, seeing refugee families arrive here, helping with settlement and all of that. But there's another pathway to refugee status, which is when somebody arrives in Canada and seeks protection after they get here. So that's a lot of the work that I'm involved in. And, you know, that's basically come to a little bit of a standstill right now because all court systems are having difficulty proceeding as normal. You know, and so what does it mean for refugees who are here? It means they're in limbo. they're trying to get status, but unlike suing somebody for poor construction work, you can't just get onto a video and expect someone who has been tortured and someone who's been subjected to some of the atrocities that Victoria was talking about to testify, perhaps from their small little iPhone, with their kids around them, etc. So those are some of the processes that have to be worked through. Everybody wants a quick resolution. And I think at the same time, you mentioned essential. What's essential? So what's essential to us as Canadians? What's essential to refugees? And during this time that hopefully our whole country and the whole world is becoming more sensitized to people who are vulnerable, refugees are also a part of that. And I see us rising to the occasion on so many levels, of people in need and vulnerable people in Canada. And what I'm hoping is that people will see refugees in that same vein. And I'm hoping that we can rise and stay high on that front. In terms of practically speaking, what this means. So, we know that a lot of people in the healthcare system are refugees. They're people who are seeking refugee status, or they're perhaps people with precarious status, people who are here without status, or people who are here as temporary workers. And we see them in long-term care facilities. We see them, delivering our groceries with Instacart. We see them on supply chains, working in the farms to make sure there's a good food supply. And we see them in so many essential aspects of our lives during shutdowns now, that I'm hoping that, there could be some kind of pathway that people do get appropriate recognition by our government and do get status, whether it's a quick pathway to refugee status or whether it's just a quick pathway to permanent resident status. I think that's something that we have to keep in focus. And again, recognizing the essential work that people are contributing to us during the pandemic right now.
I appreciate your comments. One of the things that we talk about as a group is, just like the Canadian government was making sure to bring Canadians home safely to Canada that may have been on a cruise ship or in another country, should we also be taking that view that with refugees who are fleeing for their safety, who've been granted already the rights to come to Canada, should we be making that as a priority for essential travel? Because this is a matter of life or death for these people. This is a matter, if we do not get to them, whether it's the risk of them getting COVID or them being killed where they are, what as Canada do we want to be remembered as when this is all over? And I think our government has done a tremendous job at all three levels of really trying to protect the Canadian public. But if we see refugees as part of our fabric of this country, how are we going to define them as essential? I also really appreciate the fact that you talked about the role that many immigrants and newcomers play in jobs that they are essential services, but were not always considered to be glorified roles. One of the challenges we're facing at JIAS, and we have this right now with a specific client I'm thinking about, it's very difficult at the best of time for newcomers without economic business networks to get employment. It's even harder for refugees. And when they do get a job, they're sometimes afraid to ask for things that somebody who felt more safe in their position would ask for. And we have a refugee right now that felt that because of the risk of the safety in his role, that he should quit his job. And because he didn't feel he had a voice or a right to question the employer. And I think a lot of it is the culture of how we treat and respect newcomers, immigrants of all types, refugees, that they know and that they feel secure to ask for what all of us would ask for an employer to protect or provide them with. So I really appreciate your comments, Maureen. Victoria, I'd like to go to you for a minute. And one of the issues that I was in a discussion about this morning on another call was about the fact that for newcomers, especially in this case refugees, that what we're focused on, trying to speak to doctors is a huge issue. And now with virtual visits, it's a real challenge, especially if English isn't their mother tongue. Can you share perhaps a story about your client who was 9 months pregnant, both what volunteers did and the role also of the translators, how we use them?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for mentioning, really our thanks goes to IRCC, who funds our translators, because definitely without them, we wouldn't be able to provide any services to this population. Kurmanji is very rare language, and it's a dialect of Kurdish, and very specific dialect. There is a number of dialects of Kurdish. And the interpreters are from the same community that our clients are. So that also creates some limitation on barriers. At the same time, the same interpreters, they're willing, without pay, just volunteer because it's their community, and they're definitely their heart goes for them. And these interpreters that we're working with, they arrived before the events of 2014. They arrived 10, 15 years ago, and they English quite well. And this is the people that we really rely on. So besides the interpreters, I also want to mention, and thanks again going to IRCC, I would like to mention psychotherapists. This is something that we advocated for a while after starting working with the Yazidi population. I saw it's a very important thing that in their healing process to have an opportunity for therapy. And because as we all know, it's very expensive, and because we know that there are some free services, but again, there are a number of barriers to access these services. First of all, the transportation. If it's somewhere outside of their community where they live, someone needs to drive them and bring them back. It's also, there is a wait list. So there is a lot of barriers to access free services. So we're very lucky to receive this funding for psychotherapists who actually goes to their homes and provides psychotherapy right in their homes. So during COVID, yes, I had a 9 months pregnant woman that we try to support as much as possible, and our interpreter actually drove her during the last term. She drove her to see a doctor every week, and again the interpreter insisted that we wouldn't pay her for that because she just does it out of her good heart, and this is her volunteer hours with this client. And the same interpreter spent 6 hours in the labor room with this client. This client, her husband, was 2 weeks late to catch the plane, and come to Canada before the lockdown started. So she's a single pregnant woman who is caring actually for her 12-year-old sister, and it's very challenging for them. This interpreter, yes, she was 6 hours with her in the delivery room, and that was fascinating. I also have another client who has 3 very young, small girls, and her PTSD symptoms are quite severe. So in the situation of this lockdown, her symptoms were triggered, and she had psychotic episodes when she had to be taken to ER, and a couple of times, and once she was hospitalized for a number of days. So actually, again, the community members who cared for the children during this time. And I was very concerned about that, and I kept calling and connecting with different community members, and they kept telling me, don't worry, we will take care of her, don't worry, the kids will be watched for. So community definitely provides huge support for this population. Another example, it's just historically happened that many of them reside in Richmond Hill, and as we know, Richmond Hill not so the most cheap area to live in. So most of them rent small basements in old houses that are not a very good condition. And it's quite hard to be in this lockdown, you know, with children, single mom who suffers from her PTSD, being locked down in small basements. So community is actually a very, very big support for them, and they get together, you know, for the traditional bread baking, for cookies breaking, for any holiday celebrations. And actually right now it's lost. So that's you know, a very big component also for them, feeling kind of torn apart from their community and not being to connect in person. But again, thanks for technology, they are able to speak with each other through WhatsApp. That's what they use usually on their phones. But it's still, you know, it's not the same thing as a human contact, of course. I have actually a beautiful story. If you just let me give another example. I also work with a CG group. Jacqueline was describing what their group is doing, and you know, volunteers is a big part for these people, a big support, which we actually just also rely a lot. So I work with one group, and they're a sponsorship group for the family of 11, and they came very recently. So they even almost didn't get a chance to go to school and start their ESL when quarantine started. So we came up with the idea that group will be providing them with Zoom lessons, ESL lessons, conversation cafe, at least something a little bit. But you know, it's actually was a struggle, because first of all, they didn't know how to use Zoom. They didn't have email accounts. So we literally all over the phone, I don't know how many times it took us and how many hours it took us, but we had over the phone teach them how to create email, then how do you get on the Zoom account, and we had to provide so many test calls. When finally we made it, and now they enjoy it, and they ask me, can you ask the group, which is it's a city shul, can you ask the group connect with us every single day? So I believe it's a real victory for us. Yeah.
There's a wonderful video with an Israeli young man trying to teach his mother how to work Zoom. It's very funny. Yeah. So I can envision.
yeah.
I love the fact, Victoria, that you not only shared with us specific real examples of people that we can imagine, whether they're living in crowded basements and they're going through the traumas and they can't send their kids to school and their routine is off and they miss their community. I think those are things that not on the basement level, all of us miss community, and community is so important. And I think that's why integrating successful settlement is not just about going from PR to becoming a citizen. It's about feeling a part of a community, finding people that share your values, that allow you to grow and be the best version of themselves. And people choose Canada because truly this is the greatest country in the world to come to. And I was watching last night a video by an immigrant to Canada who lives in Quebec. He's a visual artist called Tufik, and he says in his video that it doesn't matter what country we come from, it doesn't matter what language we speak, we all share common fears, and we should all share common doubts about ourselves. And the fact of the matter is, being in a country like Canada allows us to explore this and realize we're not alone. And I think, you know, Jackie, a lot of the work that you do with your community really sets a bar of excellence. And although I have to say that about all of our constituent groups, you know, you just mentioned City Shul, we work with, you know, dozens of constituent groups that really make the world of difference for the refugees. Can you talk a little bit about your experience, you know, with the constituent group role that you play? You know, what were things that you expected and what didn't you expect in the relationships? How have they morphed in a way that you could be that community for them still now?
So, so this isn't a question that I was given to prepare for. Nothing that I'm never surprised at Holy Blossom by the outpouring of volunteer goodwill of the everybody's contributions, and that goes from when I first arrived in Toronto from the States and was involved in the Out of the Cold program. So it's an incredibly generous of spirit, of effort, of finances community. And we're actually in the middle of a mitzvah week right now, and there's some real needs of the Yazidi community in particular. I know JIAS works in partnership with Project Abraham, and actually had a whole program of March break camps planned that had to be canceled. But on our website for the Thursday activities in Mitzvah Week, there are a whole bunch of needs for the Yazidis, from books and puzzles and games for the kids to cleaning supplies and olive oil and nuts and fruits, dried fruits for the families, that if anybody wants to direct themselves to holyblossom.org and find the Mitzvah Week. But what I've loved is how the last 5 years has engaged everyone across the spectrum of ages, from the young kids to our oldest members, and everybody's found a way to participate, be it, donations of laptops and iPads, be it, visits with the matriarch and patriarch, people who've come to go and have tea and try to talk English a little bit. And I see that I think Frida was on the list of participants. She's one of our first volunteers and very active in our first constituent sponsorship group. We've had bar and bat mitzvah kids who've contributed and participated. I think I told you that at my son's bar mitzvah 18 months ago, we had a number of our families who were there dancing and celebrating with us at the party and sharing the special occasion. So it's been a wonderful experience, and we have, I think, 3 or 4 more families that we've done paperwork for that we're waiting, that we hope would be considered essential travel to Canada, so we can welcome them. Though it is to welcome them properly, so we have these depths of relationships, would be most challenging. But we've got a creative community and would rise to the occasion.
I remember reading, there's a term in business they call going out of your box or out of your comfort zone. And the term that I love is, think about it in terms of extending your box, stretching it. You're still in the same box, you're just in that for people that, looking at the 3 of you, 3 women who are articulate and passionate about this, each of you, and I think our volunteer communities and our other workers at JIAS, absolutely have proven to me that they are willing to stretch that box as far as they can take it to support this community. And so with that, I'd like to go back, to Maureen. I love the story that you told me about when you were a law student and how you got into this. And perhaps because you have that 30-year experience, that window of what's happening, I'd love it if you could shed some light about your personal experience and how do you see moving forward past COVID-19, Canada and our refugee community, and how we can best support them.
Yeah, so I think, one of, the very practical things we can do is try and advocate for what we think would be appropriate for refugees now, right? So we've talked about what's happening with sponsored refugees who are approved and ready to go, but are stuck because of limitations of air travel. And we've spoken about, pandemic workers and people who are essential to what's going on now and their status in Canada. And I think it's important to make our voices known to our members of parliament, right? So what we can do is call, we can email, we can explain, what we think should be put in place. And we know that this government is concerned about refugees, is committed to a humanitarian approach to refugees. And I think if there is some pieces that we feel need moving forward, this is a great time to contact our members of parliament and suggest things. And sometimes if we know of particular people, I know we've spoken today about particular families, about particular people who've endured hardship, yet who are extremely resilient and are contributing to Canadian society now. And I think it would be great to put forward examples of people. And, sometimes people, don't, we don't know whether it's okay to put forward their names, but we can just put forward examples of situations that we know about. And I think that goes a long way to moving forward. What we see would be a just and fair treatment of refugees in the near future.
That's
Can
wonderful.
I add
Thank
to
you.
that? I mean, we really do have examples. I know even within the Holy Blossom families, where they are contributing. One young woman works at Shoppers. She started there 4 years ago as a part-time, when she was in complete use now. When she has a mask, I asked her family if, when she's on the front line as a cashier, when she's doing stocking and not, she doesn't. But arguably we could get together and make sure all these families have all the masks they need. Another is a construction manager. He was very fortunate, able to find a job in the field he had in Rwanda before he came. And he's been able to retain that job. His wife, unfortunately, has lost hers in hospitality. But actually, I think he's working on a Baycrest project. Another woman is in food preparation at a long-term care home. So we have lots of examples. I mean, those are just 3 Holy Blossom. I'm sure Victoria has, JIAS has many who are out there as essential workers contributing right now.
And I appreciate it. I think the first webinar we did in the series was with David Besmogis, the author, Karen Yaniv, one of our clients who works as a counselor in a high school, and Rabbi Tina Grimberg from Darchei Noam, who partnered with us on that webinar. And Rabbi Grimberg painted a magnificent picture of what it was like standing in line in grocery stores in Russia with her grandmother, and how her grandmother would teach her Pushkin, because you couldn't waste the time in a line and not use it for education, and how people standing next to her would add in to her lessons, and what it was like today standing in line outside Shoppers Drug Mart where no one was speaking, but everybody, once they got into the store, was acknowledging the workers. They were acknowledging the people and thanking the people that put food on the shelf. They were thanking the people that were cashing them out. And I'm hoping that through this terrible new normal that we're living with, it's opened up the eyes of people, that they're seeing these essential people. They're seeing them for the good that they contribute. Unfortunately, many people are not educated about refugees, and they do not see always the incredible contributions that they make to our communities, they make to each of us on our personal relationships. The fact that you're sharing, there's a lot of lessons we can learn from their resilience, as Victoria said, that we can do. I'm mindful of the time. It is 13 minutes before this session ends. Jackie mentioned that I did not ask her a question. So Jackie, what was it you wanted to share with this panel that I didn't get to ask you?
Oh, it wasn't that. The one you asked me was just what the things we had talked about was, how has work or school been disrupted? And work I just talked about a little bit. Of our Holy Blossom families, we have six kids, 3 different families that are in the TDSB system. So, and while these 6 kids, the families do have laptops and they do have iPads and they do have Wi-Fi, the TDSB, our Toronto District School Board, wasn't prepared and ready to go online. So, they've definitely had schooling interrupted. And, so that's where I really think old-fashioned books, the Dr. Seuss and the Cat in the Hat, or the Peter Rabbit, or the chapter books, or the age-appropriate books that we can get in the hands of these kids, so the parents can try to structure some kind of minimum daily reading, or they can climb in bed at night and cuddle around the old-fashioned way when you weren't lost in screens. Routines of reading as a family is really important. So, we have 50-something participants, almost 60. If there are some that are area, and they can contribute books or puzzles complete with all the pieces, or games or Lego and building they're not used. Please do get in touch with us to find safe ways to collect, and then to sit and hold in a place for 3 days, and then we'll distribute it.
We know that a lot of the seniors who are in senior residence any packages. They're not waiting the 3 days. And I've been told stories of people that do not have access to books other than internet. And for some people, they find it difficult to access or read, but people can still contribute in a very meaningful, relevant way is wonderful. Just to let people know, if you go onto our JIAS website, we are offering through our LINK program, wonderful programs to our CNC workers where they're doing programs for parents with their children, and there's activities. 3 of the videos are online and people can always register for those programs, but we are very to go remote and offer all of our classes to our clients in a fulsome way within a couple of weeks of getting people set up. And I thank God every day for Zoom because it really has been a godsend for us in being able to offer our service. Was there something that you want to share with the group that you think, and for our audience, in terms of things that they should be considering or thinking about what refugees are going through now during this difficult time?
You know, I just think it's very important for us to know that a lot of things that we take for granted, a lot of things that seem so simple for us, it's not so simple for them. As I talked a little bit before, and you, Elise, actually mentioned about even getting in touch with a doctor. Many of my families have a lot of medical needs, and visits to the hospital, visits to see their family doctor, and it's kind of their routine, unfortunately. So right now in these circumstances, it became very, very difficult because for someone who has very limited language abilities, to explain what's happening to them over the phone is extremely difficult. So also it's, you know, everything what's happening and what we can access online and seems for us so simple. It's, again, as I mentioned before, it's getting kids on their school classroom, getting in touch with someone through Zoom, checking, you know, emails, and this way communicating with the people. These are, everything is very, very limited for these people. Again, the biggest support of their community, which right now is not available, so that affects them a lot as well. Also limited information that they can be exposed to, that's another factor. So it's just, you know, for us and for me also professionally, sometimes I need to take a few steps back and think that, you know, many things that are so straightforward and clear for me and so easily accessible, it's not the same for this community. And sometimes what I do, I actually consult with the interpreters that I work with, because they are people from their own community, and I keep them as experts on their own community. Yeah, but at the same time, you know, working with this community, again, it's extremely inspirational. It's fantastic to see the dedication of volunteers and how they're willing to, you know, go above and beyond, helping these families the way they can. And it's also inspirational to see how strong these people are, again, surviving all the atrocities that they did, all the horrible memories that they have, and being still re-traumatized from the events that are still happening in Iraq and the situation of many families members that they still are in Iraq. This all contributes to their mental health, and nevertheless, they are so resilient, they are so strong, they still get up in the morning, their kids still go to school fed well, they take care of them, many of them, most of them actually are in ESL classes, and they do their best. And, you know, whenever we have some conversations, like, what do you want for yourself in the future? So many of them just say, you know, I'm here, my kids are safe, and I want them to be successful there. They have dreams for their kids to be lawyers, journalists, doctors, you know, and I actually love to play on those dreams, you know, and I love talking to them about those dreams. And I absolutely believe that it's possible. And these women, these widows, they're fully dedicated to being here for their families, for their children, and see them succeed in this country.
I love that you're ending on that note, Victoria. So much of what we've seen in our 98 years of existence is that almost all of our immigrants that come here lose a part of themselves coming here because they're giving something to the next generation. And whether it was Holocaust survivors that had to reinvent themselves, whether it was people that came from Vietnam that, started all over so their children would have another chance, whether it was the people from the former Soviet Republic that started all over once again, that were very highly educated and, landed up taking jobs that were well beneath their capabilities so their children and grandchildren would have a potential. The same values are true in all of our immigrants and especially in the refugees. And that hope for a future is especially inspiring and important right now. David Besmogies, in my interview with him on April the 14th, he shared the fact that when he came with his family, even though it was challenging as a child coming to Canada, and it was difficult, new language, new community, he felt he came with a community. He had his community, just like you said, the Yazidis, they get together and they bake together, they prepare for the holidays together. And he said, COVID-19 is really hard. He doesn't have that same community. So even though he's been living in Canada for close to 4 decades and he feels very Canadian, he still misses very much that community. I just want to share a couple of things before we end this webinar. This is part of a series of webinars. Our next webinar is scheduled for May the 28th. It's on immigrant artists discussing crisis and creativity in the era of COVID-19. We will be posting information on it on our website. We're doing it in partnership with the Kaufler Gallery, so we're very excited about that next talk. I want to thank each of our panelists for their incredible contribution and their insights. And Victoria, I love how you ended on that note of inspiration. Maureen and Jackie, can you perhaps share with the group, a wonderful, tidbit that we can walk away also and be inspired for the rest of our day? And I think I didn't say Maureen.
Sure. I guess I'd like to leave you with this thought. The question is, why should we care about refugees now during this pandemic? When we take a walk outside and we walk through the park and we're not even supposed to be sitting down on the park bench. Why should we care about refugees? And I think it's important now more than ever to care because refugees need help more than ever. The question to ask isn't, how did you get here or why are you here? The question to ask is, what harm could somebody face? What harm did you face? What harm would you face if you go back? And so I think, in any conversations with people who might have concerns about why refugees need support now, why refugees are considered to need essential services and are part of essential travel, the question is, what harm would somebody face if they're in their home country? And that's the focus, I think, is most important.
I guess I'll just leave it with a thought. And, I get this same satisfaction after my visits with, I call them new Canadians rather than refugees, that I used to get when I came home on Thursdays from the Holy Blossoms out in the cold. I always get so much more than I give. My life feels so much more enriched from the experience. I'm honored to meet and work and volunteer with and get to know these individuals. And that's, whether it's, the visits to the meeting at the airports or the Zumba Zoom class and seeing their little box with them on there next to me. It's enriching and lifts me up.
That's so wonderful. So on behalf of we had over 55 participants. On behalf of our 55 participants, I'm giving a round of applause to Maureen, to Jackie, and to Victoria. I want to thank each of you for taking the time, not only today, but for the viewers of the webinar. Please note that they spend a lot of time with me in advance of this session, so it's meaningful for all of you. I hope everyone felt that it was an hour well spent. I hope you can join us in 2 weeks for our next webinar on May 28th. And if you want to share this webinar with some of your friends, colleagues, and family members, you can go onto our Facebook site, and this has been recorded, as well as our previous webinar. So I wish that everybody stays healthy and happy and safe. May you find joy during these difficult times. And from all of the JIAS family, we thank you for your commitment to our work. And have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.